lots of work into the night working on a project. I don't know if you guys know, but the Department of Education has allocated $10.6 million from the Education Stabilization Funds, the second version of it, 10.6 million to the Catholic schools. All the non-public schools have gotten it as well, but our share is 10.6 million. So the schools made recommendations for services to meet the goals. Then they selected which of those services they want, how many of them they wanted. So I'm finishing up because our second draft is due today. So, if you ask me right now how I would want to spend $10.6 million personally, I probably could come up with some really great suggestions. I joked the other day that with a friend of mine that, I would travel in a way that I don't have to worry about expenses, right? And he said, well, what does that really mean? And I said, well, when I go to the mini bar in the hotel, I'm not going to worry that I'm spending $5 on a little bag of macadamia nuts. That to me is extravagance. But for the schools, fortunately, we're being scrutinized by DOE. So we got to make sure that what we're spending the money on is really going to make a difference. So that's what the schools are working on. And I think we're gonna come out on top with that goal.
What is some of the common priorities for the schools that you've been seeing in the list that they've been submitting?
The three goals are health and safety, obviously. Mm-hmm. How we're dealing with distance learning and modified learning because of the pandemic, and dealing with what we're calling learning recovery. How do we make up for what's gone on in the last year or so? And then the third thing is, how do we address social and emotional well-being? And one of the areas, which is not necessarily new, but I think something we need to put more emphasis in, is what are we going to do to help kids with physical fitness? Because we know there's a connection between physical fitness and social and emotional well-being. So for some schools, it's getting playground equipment, because right now, even if you had playground equipment, you got to limit the number of kids on them because of social distancing, right? Maybe for the older kids, it's actually gym equipment, right? Or professional support from the private gyms on the island to get physical fitness programs. It could be just getting more HEPA filters. We've got them for all the classrooms. They're on their way now. Now we got to worry about them for the gyms, the cafeterias, the libraries, any large spaces. It's for things like replacing air conditioners to get more high energy efficient ones that are going to help to make sure the circulation of the air is going to be positive. A lot of things. And then in terms of actual learning, is to look at, one of the things we put in a proposal for is, let's really find out where our students are. Let's do an assessment of the extent to which the archdiocesan standards are being followed in the schools, because even with the schools with the best distance learning programs, we know that those did not provide enough learning hours for the kids. So where are we, and what are we going to do about that? Because that's the bottom line for our kids, right? How do you make sure second graders, I know I've said this before, how do we make sure second graders are ready to go to the third grade so that down the line, they're going to continue on this academic success?
Right.
A lot of things and a lot of discussions.
Let me kind of ask you about that, because my oldest boy went to Mount Carmel, where he was able to receive a kind of a broad education that included music and a lot of physical fitness. So when you talk about kind of assessing where the students are at, are there any programs at Mount Carmel or any other schools that run the risk of not being deemed core subjects that are at risk or in danger of being cut?
You mean that they're not following the programs for academics? Or I'm not sure I understand what you're asking me, Chris.
I'm just saying, are there any programs at Mount Carmel or any other the Catholic schools that, like music or physical fitness, that may be deemed as not necessarily core subjects and in danger of being cut?
That's a great question. And I actually think, Chris, that it should not be an either or. If I look at what's going on in Mount Carmel, I went and observed a class, the kids are playing the guitar, and Dave Duenas who I think is incredible with kids who are just learning instruments. Um, Part of what we need to do is we need to make sure the kids are in the right frame of mind when they're in school. So if they're doing something fun, like learning how to play an instrument, it's likely to have an effect on how effectively they're going to be in the other classrooms. Now, could we do a better job of making a direct connection between music and literature, music and math, music and science? Yeah, probably. But I think that we should not say that we need to have one or the other. Now, some schools find it difficult to do that and will focus on the core subjects, in some cases at the expense of other areas. I mean, there are schools right now that have not been able to get Chamorro teachers. So they're not running a Chamorro program in the Catholic schools. That doesn't mean that's bad. It just means they need to work a little harder at getting that.
Right. So basically, you're saying the arts are core subjects.
Well, most people, when we look at what the feds look at, right? They don't measure the arts. But I think most educators will tell you that the arts and even physical education, I'm not a poster child for that, but most educators say that there are connections between how well kids are doing in school and how well they're able to express themselves. Part of what I've grown to believe, because I don't mind saying that in the past I've been a hardcore academics. You remember the period in the early 2000s when all we needed to do was just get everybody to read. And I still believe that. Without literacy, we're going to go nowhere, absolutely nowhere. But I wonder if we need to figure out how to get literacy in terms of reading and writing to support everything else that we think kids should learn, including a sense of responsibility. And some of that comes from music, the arts, and physical education.
The governor, it's anticipated, will place the island in PCOR 3 tomorrow. What is this going to mean for Catholic schools?
I hope what it means is that we still wash our hands, we follow social distancing, we make sure that there's the right ventilation in the classrooms. I don't think there's any reason for us to change. The only thing that I'm going to ask parents to continue to do is to curtail their activities after school, so that there's not a great chance that the virus will be transmitted to kids, and then those kids will bring it to school. We're ending our 5th week this week of face-to-face education with no positive cases in the Catholic schools. Wow. And I think the schools need to be commended for that, because some of them, I've gone to some of the schools where it's close to being militaristic. You're not 6 feet apart from me, Or at one school, I think it was at St. Francis, where the teacher said, if you stretch your arms and you can touch somebody else's fingers, you're too close, spread out. But we're also anticipating getting stuff that's going to help that. And the reason I say that is just because it's PCOR 3, we should not let down our guard.
Right, exactly.
I'd love to go into the end of May with no positive cases. Mm-hmm. And I think the schools are positioned to do that.
What about in terms of increasing student size, capacity, letting more students into the classroom or return face-to-face?
Yeah, the schools want to do that. And some schools, the nursery schools are flooded with phone calls, to get more kids in there. I think we just need to be really careful to make sure that maybe we can go from 6 feet apart to 4 feet apart, but the days of having 25 to 30 kids in a classroom might not be practical right now. Now, there are a couple of safeguards I think that when they finally come through would be good. One, for all our elementary kids, we're getting sneeze guards, and some of the schools already have them, and then to get HEPA filters in the classrooms. And I think that that's going to help to bring more kids into the classroom and maybe even call for some interaction among the kids when they're in the classroom.
Will that be a decision for each individual school to make then, if they want to increase their class sizes?
Yeah, as long as they're following public health guidelines. So I think the CDC and public health follows CDC's lead. If they deem it reasonable for us to increase the sizes, I think we probably will, because one of the challenges that I've talked about a lot is one of the reasons that Catholic schools are facing financial challenges is that if they can only have 15 students in a classroom, that means each student's tuition is paying a greater share of the teacher's salary, right? So we're not getting to take advantage of economies of scale. That puts a burden on the schools. And so I think maybe one of the things that could happen with PCOR 3 is maybe some schools can resort to having some fundraising activities, which we haven't been able to have.
Right.
I don't know any of the schools have been successful because of those restrictions. So some of those things are going to help the schools, because the bottom line is schools need to meet their payroll. They need to make sure that they have funds to continue with health and safety conditions and get us through this school year and start recruiting for next year.
You mentioned public health. The last time we had them on, which was a couple weeks ago, for whatever reason, the Division Environmental Health was on, and they were talking about how they were going into GDOE schools and they were doing inspections, and next on their list they were going to go to private schools. And so, have they begun that process? Are you aware?
They have, and several schools have already reported that they've gotten good reports from public health. But yeah, environmental health is coming through. And more than anything else, at least this is what I hear from the principals, that the people who've come to the schools have not come there with this hammer to nail them and to close them, but to say, hey, why don't you improve on this? Why don't you improve on that? Or could your protocols be more explicit about exactly how many times will the bathrooms be closed? And I think that kind of cooperation, that kind of supportive advice, I think is going to help the schools, rather than just saying, you're out of compliance, shut your school down. And I think, I'm going to pray that nothing happens before tomorrow, but the proof is in the pudding, right? No positive cases in 5 weeks of face-to-face. We had schools with as high as 85% of the students back in school. So it's not happening on a whim. I got to tell you that the principals are losing sleep, and the teachers are working hard to make sure that all the regulations are being followed.
Juan, I wanted to ask, with any of this federal money that we got, whether it's the first round of funds that was caught in the DOE procurement process, or whether it's the 10.6 of that's part of that $42 million, right?
Actually, the second round, the 10.6 million we're getting right now is part of the second round, and DOE has gotten over $100 million.
Right.
85 million going to DOE schools, and then the rest of that money going to the non-public schools.
Okay, so let me ask you this, because with a lot of these, we saw with the CARES Act, there was a timeline, like you had to spend the money by a certain amount of time. So are you guys up against the wall and having to spend any of this money before a deadline? And if so, what's that deadline, and how feasible is it for you guys to spend it?
Well, for us, we've been advised that by the end of March, we've got to make sure that we encumber our funds from the first round of ESF funds. And I think the Federal Programs Office is helping us to make sure we do that. We identify what we have, and we still have a balance because some savings we've made or because we haven't procured everything we wanted. So whatever it takes, we're going to do it. We're not going to leave any money, not leaving cookies in the cookie jar.
I'm sorry, you were kind of breaking up. That first round, you have until the end of March to spend?
That's what the Federal Programs Office has asked us to do, to make sure we do our requisition. It doesn't mean that they all have to arrive here, but we have to start the process and encumber those funds, make sure those funds are committed. And I think we're gonna turn to them for some help to make sure that we do that.
And how much did you guys get in the first round? And what's the balance?
We got 3.9 million.
3.9. And how much has not yet been encumbered?
Oh, that's a great question. Maybe 1.5, maybe less than that.
But between now and then, you're going to make sure that you put that to use. So
and that's even without buying any, Lexuses for the principals.
No, I was going to say the second round is the 10.6, right?
Yeah.
And how much?
One of the things in the second round that we're focusing on too is what are we going to do to have long-standing effects, right? I think in the first round we were worried about, are we going to have enough masks and gloves and instructional activities, instructional materials? The second round is, what are the long-term effects of this funding? And it's, how are we changing teaching and learning, which, we're all forced to rethink that. And you've heard me say this before, we can't use the adage, we've always done it that way. So this is really causing us, I think, to look at those things that are going to have an effect. I mean, one of the things we started looking at, and something I wasn't very aware of, the idea of using these robots that teach kids coding, but also teach them how to incorporate the learning of coding with core academic subjects. You teach robots to carry out a scene from a Romeo and Juliet play, or you teach robots to trace the routes of certain voyages, in the world in the past. A lot of those things really are things that are gonna trigger new ways that kids are gonna be learning, because I don't think it's gonna be the same as it has been in the past.
I did want to go back to the first round and then the 1.5 million that has not been encumbered. Why is that? Why haven't you guys been able to spend that 1.5 million?
Yeah, again, I don't know if that number is correct, but part of it is one of the reasons why there's still some money left over is when we got initial estimates. Like an example is Chromebooks, right? Somebody just threw out a number. Oh, maybe they'll cost $700. Well, then when DOE's procurement process went through, it turns out they only cost $325, especially because of the number of items that we're getting, the number of units. So we saved a lot of money. So now we got to figure out, how are we going to spend that money? And almost on a daily basis, an idea comes up, and I try to support the schools when they suggest something. Now, getting it through means we just got to do some more work to research. But that's one of the reasons. The other is that we modified our request maybe in November, the beginning of November, because we were not thinking just of distance education, but we started to switch our thinking to being face-to-face. And so that, I think, kind of added more time that we needed to do the research. But I promise you, we are going to put in requisitions. We might leave like $5 or $10 for, I don't know, stamps for thank you cards or something. But other than that, we're going to try to spend all the money.
Okay. Any update on sports? I know when we spoke with John Fernandez yesterday, that's one of the things that they are going to be looking at with PCOR 3, and starting with, of course, low-risk sports. For private schools, Catholic schools, is there any indication that we will see any sort of interscholastic sports going on?
Absolutely. I think if the coaches had their way, we would have had full sports activities from day one. So there are a lot of discussions. I think both the coaches and the students are chomping at the bit to get back to having that. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of physical fitness, I think that's part of what contributes to social and emotional well-being. So I haven't spent a whole lot of time on it, but in terms of the IIAAG, Terry DeBold keeps me abreast of all of the ongoing discussions about sports. And I think there probably are some very casual activities going on right now, like students who are training, but in very small groups, observing social distancing, not having contacts, just making sure they're safe. One of the concerns with sports is, as I've mentioned before, I've asked parents to curtail activities outside of school. And with sports, except for those who are working in their own teams, when there's competition, then the kids get exposed to other kids. And our kids themselves can take care of themselves, or the kids at one school can take care of themselves. But if they come together, and there is contact, then we need to wonder whether or not there would be transmission of the virus. But I think, that even with some exceptions, that there aren't many transmissions among young people, and unfortunately there are a few. But that doesn't mean we stop worrying about it and have to take care of it. So I think with sports, the key is, what are we going to do to encourage the kids to get out there, even if they're just training, so they are building up. One of the groups that I really am concerned about right now are those kids who are thinking they might want to participate in sports in college because they're not having an opportunity to demonstrate their competitiveness right now. So there are a lot of issues with sports that we have to pay attention to.
Juan, I wanted to go back to what you had said earlier about having a hard time finding Chamorro teachers. I know a ton of Chamorro teachers. So are you guys looking for Chamorro teachers and not being able to find them? Are the Catholic schools in any danger of not providing the mandated Chamorro language classes?
Yeah, and that I'm not sure, Chris, if that mandate applies to the Catholic schools. But I know that my experience has always been that the schools have had Chamorro classes, but with those challenges of finding the teachers, I think some of the schools have not been able to. But we're going to work on them. I had a meeting yesterday with representatives of the schools to plan for Mes Chamorro. And there's a great deal of concern that the Catholic schools can play a very significant role, the way the Catholic Church has, playing a very significant role in enhancing the learning and the use of the Chamorro language. So one of the things we're doing is we want to find ways to highlight people in our past from the Catholic Church who have supported the Chamorro language. But I don't think there's any school that's actively saying they don't want to teach Chamorro. I think that sometimes it's something that they just are trying to address as much as they can.
So I just want to. So you don't think the mandate for Chamorro language applies to the Catholic schools?
Yeah, I could check on that, Chris. But I just remember when I was at DOE that the mandate was very clear that it was a public school issue. I mean, there are many non-public schools on Guam that do not teach Chamorro right now.
Right. I mean, that being said, though, I think we should also commend, of course, Mount Carmel does great every year, but then most recently, FD took gold in the Chamorro language classes. So for those schools that do offer it, it's very exceptional.
Yeah, and those schools that even if they're not teaching them in classrooms, in the nursery schools, I'm told they pray before and after meals in Chamorro.
Right.
Now, whether or not the kids know what they're praying is another story, but it's coming through, and I think we need to work on it. And I think we need to be committed to not just the compliance, but really the commitment that speaking Chamorro, especially as far as the Catholic Church is concerned, is pretty important. Our leader, Archbishop Burns, tries very hard at Mass whenever the Tatanmami is sung or said, that he tries to do his part. He has a very strong Detroit accent when he speaks Chamorro. I think a lot of people I know really.
Hey, easy there. I don't want you to get in trouble with the Archbishop now.
No. I'm saying this in a positive light.
Right. Yeah.
Recognize and respect the fact that he's trying.
I mean, it's
Exactly,
funny. It's
exactly.
Funny. Yeah, of course. It's funny that you bring up Detroit, though, because, I've been going to Cathedral the last few Sundays, and it seems like every homily the Archbishop has, he's always got a cool story about Detroit. I don't know if you noticed that. It's kind of a random thing. Go ahead, Jay. Yeah.
I told the Archbishop that when I was growing up, we used to hear about all kinds of things about New York from Bishop Baumgartner, right? Because he was from New York. We got a lot of support from New York. A lot of priests came from New York. So most of the Capuchins I knew came from a particular place in New York where they went through seminary. So maybe that's just a function of where our bishop comes from.
Right. Yeah.
All right.
No, hey, Juan, this is Jason. I remember when the Archbishop first came to the island and the very first Mass he held down in Cathedral, he walked in, he went up to the pulpit, and everybody, it was a packed cathedral. I mean, it was shoulder to shoulder at the time. Everybody was like, greatly anticipating him. And the first thing he said, he goes, "Okay, before I begin my sermon, I'd like to say half a day." And you could tell he was working at it and everything. I mean, he got a standing ovation in church during the mass. I mean,
Right,
he's
yeah.
worked at it.
I heard he wears a Detroit Pistons jersey under his outfit.
I wouldn't be. No. I mean, I believe when he was at the University of Michigan, I think he did a little boxing.
Oh, well, I better stop then. I don't want to
Yeah.
get boxed.
he's-
Roll
he's
your
a-
roll over there.
They
No,
come
it-
up for communities and be like, put up.
His excellency is a very good athlete.
I know. I'm just playing.
I got some rosary beads for you.
Thank you. All right, Juan. What else you got? Anything else?
Yeah, I did want to follow up on vaccinations because when educators were became part of the eligibility criteria group, it was around 2-3 weeks ago. We're going to see GDOE. They're going to start, their teachers and their staff are going to start getting their second doses this week, actually. What about for private schools, for Catholic school teachers and staff?
Same with the Catholic school teachers. They're in line to get their second dosage. I've already gotten mine, but about 75% of the Catholic school teachers and staff, not just teachers, but staff members who are exposed to students, have opted to get the vaccination in our schools.
And they're all due, that 75% are due for their second dose.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
How many teachers is that?
75% of 450.
All right.
I remember figuring this out. Over 300.
Nice. All right.
Okay.
And
Hopefully,
that's faculty and staff.
right. 75%, that's a really high number.
You guys should do a commercial.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, I think many of them, some of the teachers were apprehensive about coming back to school for health reasons. And I think when the access to the vaccination came through, some of them felt that was one way to deal with their apprehension.
Right.
So I'm glad that they did.
Juan, just real quick before I let you go, I wanted to talk about, I asked John Fernandez this, I want to say last week, but are you dealing with kids who are just lacking motivation, maybe their emotional, mental well-being not where it should be because, the pandemic? And if so, how do you kind of address that?
First of all, that's a great question, Chris. And many of the principals are letting me know that one of the ways they're dealing with it is they're giving the kids time to not bug them if their assignments might be late. Not that we want them to be irresponsible, but we might understand what they're going through. The second thing is to make sure that they're communicating with the families to find out if there are specific concerns from home. And the bottom line is, with my personal worry about the number of kids and we've had them, right? We know we've had them over the pandemic. We've had kids who've committed suicide, or kids who've hurt themselves, or kids who've become so despondent that they're not functioning in school. I think paying attention to their health and wellness, and especially social and emotional wellness, is really critical. And again, there's that fine line where how do you insist that the kids be responsible, but at the same time really respond? And one of the ways that some of the schools are doing that is to give these kids the opportunity to stay home if that's what's going to help them, and continue with distance learning. But I know when I've gone to the schools and I see especially small kids playing with each other, I know that their presence in school is affecting their social and emotional well-being. So I'm hoping that some of that will continue as we get more and more kids into the schools.
Right on. Well, thank you, Juan. You good, Bree?
Yes, thanks, Juan. Was there anything else you wanted to get out?
That's it. Just great work from the schools. Thank you.
Thanks, Juan.
Okay.
Have a
Take
good
care.
weekend. Right
Stay
on.
safe.
Okay. See you. Juan Flores, Dr. Juan Flores, Catholic School Superintendent. Good morning. 8:49. Let's go back into the KUAM News Zoom room where we have a couple of my favoriteest troublemaker senators. I mean, session it's pretty hot. It's been pretty hot lately, Bree. And so we're going to bring on Senator Tello and Senator Joanne